So, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our next panel. If everyone could take a seat, we can get started. We've been discussing a lot over the past 24 hours, the Green New Deal, the future of energy, and in particular, the future of mobility for the automobile sector in Germany and beyond. And now we want to deepen that discussion with two men who are very knowledgeable about the subject. We have Guillaume Faury, who is the CEO of Airbus, a company that needs no introduction. And we also have Benedict Looney, who is the CEO of BP, the oil company. I'd like to invite both gentlemen up to the stage, please. Well, I think we'd actually like to start with you, Guillaume. You're going to give a short statement, and then we'll get into the discussion. Yes.
Hello, everyone. Great pleasure to be here today in Berlin, in a quite special environment, as we can see looking at you from that place. I allowed myself to remove my mask for a moment. Indeed, there is a huge impact for aviation, for commercial aviation, from the coronavirus and all the measures which have been taken by governments. And I won't go through the different phases of the pandemic for Airbus, but with around only 50% of the air traffic which is still alive and not really recovering, you can imagine the impact on all the industry. Airbus is not only a company of commercial aviation business, even if it's the main activity. We're also in defense, in space, in helicopters, which are by far less impacted. But given the size of commercial aviation, it's obviously the main driver of the big restructuring we're in and the adaptation to this new environment. And I think it's all about the ability to adapt to change, to be resilient in a very unpredictable and ambiguous environment where it's very difficult to find the crystal ball and guess what's going to happen. So we need to keep that flexibility to be able to adapt very fast. We see as well the benefits, the importance of commercial aviation for many activities of human beings. There's roughly 8 to 10% of the global GDP that is enabled by aviation, and tourism is obviously one of them. But we see as well that commercial aviation means connectivity. It's a sovereign domain for many states, but connectivity brings people together, is an important factor of stability, of peace, of prosperity. And this is what we will need to invest in the transformation that are required for this world, and one of them being decarbonization and all what we need to do for global warming. So we should not lose sight of the future. We have a very challenging short-term situation to manage with COVID, but we see and we believe that aviation will remain a driving force for the future, for society. And we are under the influence of three main so-called mega trends. One is digitalization. The other one is automation and robotization. And the third one, we call it decarbonization. That's probably the common theme with the other speaker. What does it mean, digitalization for us? Well, it means collecting data. And we have tens of thousands of planes and other objects flying with hundreds of thousands of data being measured on each and every plane. And we can go from theory to observation big times. And therefore, creating data lake, collecting data, then using artificial intelligence, it opens a new world of possibilities. In the defense arena, and we see the Future Combat Air System, that is the project for the European air and space power to ensure the sovereignty of Europe in the air and in space in the future. It will be a system operating in a combat cloud, digital, cyber secured, and with many flying objects, including satellites, speaking to each other and exchanging data. Digitalization also means going to digital design, manufacturing, and services, creating a huge system, a huge platform to design, manufacture, and service planes in a fully digital and integrated way. And these are massive investments. And before we have also the ability to use artificial intelligence in the air. Automation and robotization, it's a deep change that has already impacted microelectronics, the car industry, but now it's coming on large objects, very complex, the most sophisticated one that we produce in these large numbers. And it's also a transformation that comes with digitalization. And probably for us, the biggest challenge is the decarbonization, transforming our industry. That's probably the biggest change we have seen since the outset of commercial aviation. It's a challenge. It's also a fantastic opportunity. And it's a topic on which being a European company is an asset, is a competitive advantage, because we have this sense of urgency, the need of decarbonizing industries, decarbonizing society, that is very much helping in this case for Airbus. So we are at a time where, because of coronavirus, we have less means to invest, but it's even more important than ever to be able to prepare the future with these big transformations at play. What is important and what to share with you today? Well, this will require massive investment for technologies where the critical mass plays a big role, and the strategic competitors are either US companies like Boeing or Chinese companies, and therefore there's only one way forward. It's to be Europeans together, and to gather the efforts, to collect the initiatives and make sure we are at the critical size. Therefore, I'm again very happy to be here. Looking forward, Matt, to your questions and to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Bernard, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Guten Tag, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today. My first business trip since February, I think, of this year, and I think it says a lot that it is here in Germany, and congratulate you on, I think, some very good handling of the coronavirus. It's an honor and a pleasure to join Guillaume for this discussion, and thank you, Matt, for facilitating this. I know that our industry, the energy industry, has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, really hard actually, but Guillaume's sector, of course, as he just outlined, has been hit probably even harder, and I want to applaud how he and his company are responding. And I'd like to recognize, Guillaume, the ambition to zero emissions aviation that you have, and that Airbus is building the world's first, I think, emissions-free aircraft, something that you announced just a few days ago, which takes a lot of courage in the middle of the global pandemic, and really applaud you for that. We have an ambition of our own at BP to be a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, and to help the world get to net zero. We announced that ambition earlier this year in February, actually on February the 12th. And then we spent some time last month going through in detail our new strategy to support that ambition. Guillaume has talked, I know, about a period of innovation in aviation like nothing seen since the dawn of air travel. And at BP, we think the same actually is true of the energy sector. The world, as you all know, is not on a sustainable path, and the carbon budget is running out. And we recognized at BP that we needed to reimagine energy. And to reimagine energy, we needed to reinvent our company. We needed to reinvent BP, and we're in the process of doing that. We've set out a strategy that will see us transform from what has traditionally been called an international oil company, an IOC, something we have done for 111 years. We've been focused on producing resources. And we want to move to become an integrated energy company that is focused on delivering solutions for customers. We'll be a more diverse company in terms of energy. We plan to produce more renewable energy over time and low carbon technology, and we will produce less hydrocarbons over time, less oil and gas. We've said that by 2030, the company should be quite different, one that will have developed 50 gigawatts of renewable electricity, up from 2.5 gigawatts today, one that has increased investment in low-carbon energy from about $500 million per annum today to $5 billion per annum by 2030, one with a hydrogen business that will have a 10% share of market in core markets, one that has doubled its customer interactions from 10 million per day today to 20 million a day, including serving more customers, as any of you who know our Aral stations here in Germany, and one with 70,000 electric vehicle charging points, up from 7,500 today, and one that is engaged in energy partnerships with cities, 10 to 15 major cities, we hope, around the world, including, I hope, here in Germany. Jet fuel is a major area where we want to reduce our carbon footprint. In November, for example, of 2016, this year, Fulcrum and BP, a US company, formed a major strategic partnership. They're a pioneer in low-cost transportation fuels from household rubbish, from city waste. And we took a $30 million equity investment in Fulcrum and struck a 500 million gallon jet fuel offtake agreement that will provide Air BP with 50 million gallons per year of low-carbon jet fuel that is interchangeable with conventional jet fuel. And here in Germany, we're working on synthetic jet fuel and working on it in the hope that the upcoming legislation on decarbonizing the fuel sector will include regulatory support for synthetic fuel in aviation. We recognize that transformation is tough, but we're committed to the new direction of travel, and we are confident that it is right. Right for us, right for the people who depend on our products and services, right for the people who invest in us, and right for the companies, organizations, and indeed the countries where we work and who we partner with. We also know that we don't have all the answers, and that we will undoubtedly make some mistakes, and that we have a lot to learn from others. And that's one of the reasons why I welcome and we welcome dialogues like we have here today, where we can listen and learn to knowledgeable voices on these subjects. So thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for your statements. I'd like to start with you, Guillaume, if I may. You spoke about the necessity to adapt, the need to adapt to this difficult environment. But if you're an airplane maker, how can you adapt if nobody is flying?
Well, we are not in a situation where nobody's flying, but there's obviously by far less traffic than it used to be the case, and we anticipate that there will be a recovery post-pandemic. So it's about resilience in a very big downturn like we've never had before. How do we adapt? Well, we have negotiation with airlines to see, depending on their individual situation, how they want to manage the situation. They know they will still need to decarbonize their own activity, and therefore they need to replace old planes that were burning a lot of fuel with new ones, which are by far less burning fuel and CO2 emitting. And it's about finding the right balance. So for us, in 2020 and 2021, it means that we have reduced by 40% our production rate and our deliveries. And we're trying to work bottom-up with our customers and top-down, looking at the world and how things are evolving to determine what's the right trajectory. And in the meantime, the whole supply chain, that is one of the most complex and integrated supply chain in the world, which is the one of aviation, is adapting to that situation. We're using many ways of doing it. One is data. And at Airbus, we have completely reorganized the company, readapted from a given point to another one, everything, let's say, within 3 months. That's quite amazing. That's what we're doing.
Bernard, you mentioned the possibilities presented by synthetic fuels, which I believe in the future is something that, Guillaume, that you're also hoping will come about. How long do you think it'll take before we could see sort of viable synthetic fuels being used in aviation?
Thank you, Matt. I think if you think about transportation in general, air and road travel will double, I think, between now and 2050. The number of people in the world that have never been on an airplane is actually astounding. It's well over 50%. And that has to change things that we take for granted. So I think transportation itself will evolve. I think passenger vehicles, it looks like, will go the way of electrification. That certainly seems to be the direction of travel. I think heavy-duty transport, hydrogen seems very, very suited for that. In aviation, I think hydrogen is possible. E-fuels we see as being possible, and biofuels as well we see as being possible. And of course, biofuels are being made today. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, as the aviation sector goes on its net zero trajectory, we will see an increasing mix of synthetic fuels, of biofuel into that mix, and that is the type of policy that I think is needed to ensure that happens, and that's what's being put on the table here in Germany, I believe, today.
Indeed, and there's been a lot of buzz, I would say, around the topic of hydrogen, especially in Germany, it seems. But Guillaume, how serious is this push towards hydrogen aviation? I mean, when are we really going to see the first hydrogen-powered airliner, and how are you going to convince people to get into an airplane that is fueled by hydrogen?
Well, people are flying in planes which are fueled by kerosene. We just get used to it. And it took time to get to the safety level where we are today. But today, aviation is the safest mode of transport, by far, compared to any others. Well, how do we get there? It will be phased. And I completely support what you said on the different sources of energy. Biofuels should be used already today by far more than they are, because our planes, the ones that are delivered today, are capable of 50% of biofuels in the fuel, okay, today. And we are just at below 0.5% in terms of usage. This is a short-term lever to reduce the emissions. It's not the long-term solution because we won't have the volume. It's not scalable as we would need. E-fuels are a very credible potential with architecture of planes being very similar to what they are today. So small change to the architecture and the plane itself and the engines, but the challenges of the cost for the e-fuels and the availability in large quantities. So we see it more for the wide body and probably for the long term. Then when it comes to hydrogen, it's a very credible solution. I could elaborate on the technical reasons why it's the case. We believe there is no need to see the laws of physics changing. We don't need to multiply the energy density of batteries by 10 to be able to fly with hydrogen, because the hydrogen has the energy density that we need for planes. It's not the case for batteries. But there's a lot of work, engineering work that needs to be done. We need to go for design, testing, comparing different solutions, and this is what we explained when we rolled out our 3 concepts 2 weeks ago. Now, what are the high-level challenges when it comes to between now and the day when we will enter into service the first hydrogen commercial plane? I see 3 challenges. The first one is the plane itself and the technologies and mastering those technologies, raising the level of safety, as you rightly said. We already have hydrogen-powered systems in space with launchers and with satellites, but we have to do it at scale on commercial airplanes. So technologies for the plane. But there are 2 other challenges that need more people, that need the broader society. The first one is the regulation. We need to prepare a global regulation, a level playing field for use of hydrogen and certification of civil planes powered by hydrogen. And it needs to be a global regulation, because if it's a local one, we won't have the critical mass to launch programs which are in tens of billions of euros of investment. Okay? So a global regulation. We have time, but not so much time when we think of something that has to be global. And the third one is to make sure that around 2027, 2028, when we will launch this program, when the technologies will be mature, that we have certainty, or enough certainty, that in 2035, there will be green hydrogen available in large quantities in a sufficient number of airports. And that's where we need energy companies and the broader society.
Could you explain what you mean by green hydrogen?
If you use an electric car today, it's considered a decarbonized car. Well, it depends if the electricity which has been produced to power your car through the battery is a green electricity or not. And in the vast majority of cases today, it's not green electricity. If we invest tens of billions of euros for a decarbonized plane, okay, we want to make sure that it will really be decarbonized, and therefore that the hydrogen will be green or sufficiently green at the beginning. It means produced by a primary source of energy that is green energy.
Bernard, your company has been sort of the focus of the ire, I would say, of the kind of green lobby over the years. You mentioned that you're trying to shift away from being an oil company into a much more diversified energy company. But some people might say, well, we've heard that over the years a lot from companies like yours, and we know your kind of your BP logo, the flower, but we're not fooled by it. At the end of the day, you're an oil company. What's really different this time? I mean, you have set out this quite ambitious target to go to carbon zero, basically, by 2050, which is even more ambitious than the Chinese. Why is it really so necessary for you to accelerate this process now? And also, what might your company look like in 2050? Where's the money really going to be coming from?
Well, thank you. And yes, I think I asked somebody yesterday what the German for greenwashing is, and they said greenwashing. So I think I get the translation. What's different and why now? Why now? Because if I look at the stakeholder group, I had the opportunity before I took over this job in February to go and listen to a lot of stakeholders around the world, to members of civil society, to NGOs, to investors, to our employees. And what became clear is that it was the time to change, that we had to change. We had to change for the long-term interests of our company. But not alone did we have to change, but actually we wanted to change. We wanted to bring about this change. And the difference will be in the execution. We're a public company, so when we say we're going to do something in terms of investment levels and so on, we must follow through, and we will follow through. So you will see us gradually and rapidly actually increasing in the next 5 years, increasing investment by 8-fold, 10-fold by 2030. You'll see us building out that renewable power business where we have an incredible partnership in solar with Lightsource BP, one of Europe's largest solar developers. We own 50% of now in 13 countries around the world. We have a partnership in offshore wind with Equinor in the United States and so on. So it is the right time. It's a question of wanting to and needing to. It's what society wants of a company like ours. It's what our employees want us to do. And in the long run, I believe it's in the long-term interests of our shareholders. In 2050, it will be, as we say, an integrated energy company. We will be providing energy that's diversified to cities, to large corporates, to industries. And what's happened, Matt, is that energy is changing. Energy is changing. What people want from energy is changing. They want it to be clean, they want it to be affordable, and they want it to be reliable. And there was one dominant source of energy over the recent history: coal in the first half of the last century, oil in the second half of the last century. What's happening today is we have a diversified energy mix: solar, wind, natural gas, oil still, nuclear, hydro. Actually, that's where we play. We play by bringing these energy types together because they all have different characteristics, and yet the customer wants one thing. Our partnership with Microsoft for their data centers, they want it to be clean, reliable, and affordable. And we can do that. We can knit the different energy types together because we're in them all and deliver that solution. So for us, it's very exciting. It's a period of great change. It's not going to be straightforward, as anything worthwhile in life never is. But we're very committed now to this transition. And I think people who have doubts will have to wait and see. And our job is to execute.
What role do you think nuclear should play in that mix? That's a technology that has obviously been with us for a long time. It's been very successful in most of the world. It has, a few negatives, as the people in this country have discovered, and they've decided to turn off their nuclear power plants. But how do you see demand for nuclear in particular evolving in the coming decades, especially in a country like China, which doesn't have maybe all of the opportunities to rely on renewable energy that some other countries do, and where nuclear could really solve a lot of their energy needs?
Well, one of the things that when we do strategy, as Guillaume knows very well, is it's the things you choose not to do are as important as the things that you choose to do. So the first thing I would say is BP is not in the nuclear business, never has been, and it's not something that plays to our strengths, so we won't be in it. If you look at energy in the world, nuclear will have a role to play in the world, not a significant one, but a role. I think President Xi's 2060 announcement, I think is actually a very important milestone, a very important signal. I think it should be encouraged and embraced. And China will need all forms of energy to do what it has to do to feed its population, to give them the prosperity that we take for granted. So it will be a mix. Nuclear may be in there, but natural gas will play a huge role. They're investing huge amounts into renewables. Of course, coal is still part of the system there. But I think that direction, and it is a long way away, but for a country at that stage in its development, I think it's a very significant step.
Guillaume, I'd like to come back to you and these plans for the zero-emission aircraft, which I think a lot of people are very excited about. But a project on this scale in the past has typically required support from governments, public money to really get it over the line. What is your view on this? What kind of support are you getting in this area, and what more would you like to see?
We've seen a lot of change in the last years. We are in the Hydrogen Council as Airbus. It was a very interesting place to be to discuss with many other stakeholders in the world and other companies. And we've seen really a strong momentum. Well, what we expect from governments is first a vision where hydrogen plays a role and enabling the development of hydrogen in the society as a source of, or as a way to store energy. It's not a source of energy. And this is the kind of support we need at that stage. Plus the vision that there will be a need for this standardization I was mentioning before. Now we need as well a push, and it comes from private sector and also from states. We need a push towards availability of large quantities of decarbonized energy. And that's really what will make the difference. When we look at human beings on Earth and the evolution, I think it's amazing to see the evolution of the need for energy, the energy that is required, and it continues to go up.
But do you think that the German path here is realistic? Because, as we were just discussing, they pulled out of nuclear, they're pulling out of coal. Your own country, France, relies still quite heavily on nuclear. And given the rising demands for energy, is it realistic to think that you're just going to be able to rely on renewable energy?
Back to the question on nuclear, I think nuclear has to play a role. And Fukushima, in that perspective, was really bad news for global warming. If global warming is a priority, then getting to decarbonize primary source of energy is the short-term priority. On the long term, I believe we will have enough green energies to sustain the needs on Earth, but on the short term, the transition really needs to rely on the many sources you mentioned, and probably nuclear as well. And it's important that this transition is supported by the community or the communities. This is not something aviation can change. It's a change of the source of energy. It's very close to sovereignty of states. It requires huge amount of investment. This needs to be focused. There is a need of alignment. This is where Europe can play a role, at least on that side of the world, and where we would need the same kind of push in different areas. You probably saw the announcement of President Xi on the will to be carbon neutral in 2060. I think this is good news.
To what degree, though, are your own customers pushing you in this direction? Because I think the airlines, now face, as we were discussing with Bernard on BP and the oil companies, a kind of PR problem, in that they are fairly or not associated with carbon emissions on a large scale. How much interest is there from your companies to kind of push you to start making carbon neutral airplanes?
First, there is a large diversity of situations on the pressure that the airlines are getting on environmental topics. It's not everywhere like it is here in the center of Europe. Second, yes, many airlines want to transform their own business and decarbonize. They have different means of doing it on the short term that can't rely on the planes that will enter into service in the 2035s. It doesn't work. So they're working with us on very short-term solutions. It comes with air traffic management improvement in Europe, where we can save roughly 10% of the CO2 emission if we get it right, by introduction of new technologies. The generation of planes that we deliver today are 20 to 25% less emitting in terms of CO2 than the previous generation, so you can do a big change. And they're looking at introduction of bio, or to some extent e-fuels already, with project at a small scale, but you need to first crawl and then walk and then run, and that's the view that the aviation is taking. It will take time, but with time and determination, we can really make things change over time.
Bernard?
Yeah, just to add to what Guillaume has said, I think it is always important to, as we know in life, to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And by that I mean, different countries, as Guillaume says, and different customer groups are in different places, mainly because they're in different places in the stage of their development. So, we're going to build a very large gasoline retail business network in India over the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to do that with Geo. It's going to be called Geo BP. And of course, someone asked me, why are you not building that out as an electrified network for people in India and not starting with gasoline stations? And the answer, of course, is that there are millions, tens of millions of people in India who do not have access to electricity in their own homes, let even imagine having an electric vehicle. So it is important that we understand that, of course, not everyone have the privileges that we have. Our job is to help them get the cost structure in a place where they can do the things that they want to do in a way that is least impactful on the environment. And the way we'll do that in India is we will build that infrastructure as Geo BP. And because both of our companies, Geo and BP, are committed to net zero, I hope that as we enter the 2030 time period, we can then convert that infrastructure to electrification, which I think will be very applicable in India. But all the projections for emissions in the world do allow for some growth in these emerging economies. Over time, it will have to turn around, of course. So I think it is about getting the right private sector companies involved in the infrastructure build-out so that it can be transitioned over time.
Well, I find it interesting that you both have a kind of global perspective, which is often missing in these discussions. In terms of this debate here in Europe in particular about energy and where it comes from, do you think that puts Europe at a competitive disadvantage, say, to other parts of the world? North America, China come to mind. Guillaume?
No. On the contrary, and I said it in my introduction, I think it's a competitive advantage, actually. Yes, we are under more pressure. The need for change, for adaptation is a push that is not always very comfortable to live with, but it's going in the right direction. And we feel it with our employees, with our customers, with the broader society. So that's one of the reasons why we went public on our innovations and our efforts on hydrogen. We could have kept it more confidential, and to some extent it's easier to do this way. But there is expectation, so we need to share with the rest of the society what we are doing, what kind of results it can deliver, and fulfilling expectation. There's a way to transform. We want to be an actor. We need a lot of other players with us. We need cooperation. That's very clear, and it's easier to gather forces to create cooperation if what you're doing is clear, if everybody understands what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it makes sense, why it's affordable. And in that sense, I think Europe is in the right spot, but it deserves a lot of debate in the society. You have people who are not necessarily believing in what you're saying, and we might not get everything right as our ambitions are telling us. That's okay. That's innovation, that's entrepreneurship, I would say.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a great discussion, and I think you've given us a lot to think about for the rest of the event. A big hand of applause for Guillaume and Bernard. Thank you.